fam. Welcome to another episode of The Good, Bad, and Ugly about real estate. I got a great guest for you, my boy Benson.
Please sit down.
What's going on, Benson?
What's up, man? How are you?
I'm doing really good. Me and Benson, we reconnected last year in Scottsdale. I met Benson back in like 2016 when I just got into real estate here in the Denver area. And he had some software that he was sharing with everybody to help them do their investing, improve the way they invested. So I'm not going to steal any of his thunder. So as in typical Good, Bad, and Ugly forum, Benson, go ahead and tell everybody about yourself. You know, what made you decide to get into real estate?
Well, I've been in the business for over 20 years now. Started out as a lender. I was doing loans for mortgages, started doing hard money loans. I got licensed as a real estate agent, still licensed to this day. Don't use my license for much, except for like my own deals and a deal here and there. But I keep it for, referrals, and it's a good thing to have just in case. Sure. But I'm licensed here in Colorado. But I got into the business back in 2000, let's say two is probably when it happened. I was active duty military at the time. 9/11 had happened, and I actually was in grad school to get my my business degree, graduate's degree. And 9/11 happened, and I got yanked out of school. And I was in the National Guard at the time, so I'd already done some time in the military. And when you're in the military, sometimes you have a lot of time to yourself because you're waiting around a lot. And my job was military police, so I was out at Buckley. We were protecting F-16s and weapons things.
Yeah.
And so I had some time, right? I had some time because we do work 12-hour shifts. Yep. So, and it was always mid, so it was 6 to 6. And so I'd have 12 hours off. And then because you do 12s, you oftentimes will have 3 days off in a row, right in the middle of the week. And so I was trying to find some way to occupy my time. And I was always interested in real estate. And, I had been doing, entrepreneurial type adventures all my life. My mostly adult life. Like I started when I was 12 slinging newspapers, right? Gotcha. So I had my paper out, right? A lot of guys start off doing papers for some reason. I don't know why. But I started listening to CDs, Carlton Sheets, reading books. I was, just consuming what I could find about real estate investing and mindset type stuff too. And decided to get into the business and started off with loans. Did my first deal in like 2003, 4, something like that.
Okay.
And so it just kind of grew from there. But it was just my way of taking my entrepreneurial spirit and executing on it, and thinking about how can I grow wealth in kind of part-time as I grew. That's how it started.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I met you, and I mentioned this at the beginning of this episode, you had developed or was associated with a software called Privy. Can you share with us how that became about, how you got involved in that product?
Yeah. So back in like 2010, 11, this was after the downturn, the Great Recession. And I basically kind of recreated myself as an investor-friendly agent.
Okay.
I was doing some deals myself, and I saw a lot of opportunities with foreclosures because there was a lot of foreclosures that were coming on the market.
Yeah.
And so I went and hung my license at a brokerage in Colorado called the Mercury Alliance that had probably 100 foreclosure listings at any given time. So I wanted to get first look at these things. So I'm thinking, how can I see these before the public does? And it was by becoming an agent at one of the brokerages that had some of the most listings in the whole state.
Right.
And so I got to see these properties first. I got to evaluate them. I got to walk them. I got to do my due diligence. And sometimes I'd have an offer prepared and ready to go for one of my clients or for myself, like the minute the thing was listed. And it ended up getting us a lot of deals. Now, we didn't get all the deals, but what it did end up getting me was a lot of clients that were investors, because a lot of people would call in on our signs. And one of my jobs was to take those incoming sign calls and to work with them, because I had a commission split with the office.
Wow.
Crazy. That was the most I ever did in my career, but it was pretty exciting. And another agent joined the office, and his name was Scott Fall, and he was going to have a similar role to what I was. And Scott Fall now is my friend and business partner with Privy. And so the idea of Privy developed based off of something that he was doing every day, which was creating what we called a hot sheet. And the hot sheet was he was going in and pulling down all the new listings every day that came on the market and pulling out the ones that were hot, and then he would send those out to his investor clients. And so we thought, okay, and it's if there's 100 new properties tomorrow, let's just say on the market, and you have to evaluate 100 properties, maybe 5 of them are deals, right? Maybe 10.
Right.
So you're wasting 90 to 95% of your time analyzing properties that aren't deals anyway.
Right.
So that's when the idea arose of, okay, well, is there a way to automate this, right? Is there a way to automate the comping process, a way to find opportunities using data, technology, automation? Now, at that time, data wasn't readily available like it is today.
Right.
A thing that was at that point being conceived of was called RETS, Real Estate Transaction Standard. It was a standardization of data nationwide through MLSs, so that an agent could come in and know exactly what a certain field meant. Like if a square feet means square feet, and it's formatted a certain way. And if you went to a different MLS, it'd be the same thing.
Gotcha.
And part of the reason why they did that was so that they could build products on top of the data, right? Because
Right.
the normalization of the data is an important piece of making data sort of commoditized and available for sale. It didn't exist before when we were thinking about Privy. So about that time, I was doing angel investing. I was investing in startup companies, and I
Okay.
was putting chunks of cash into little startups. I had some money in a nutraceutical company. I had started my own, companies through private equity. I invested in a technology company out of California called Clout, which was a fintech startup.
Okay.
And that company, the guy I invested with, raised like $1 million, and he asked me to come out and run it with him.
Okay.
So this is about the time that Privy was going to be built. Clout hit. So I picked up and moved to California. But before I left, I told my partner, Scott, I said, listen, Scott, I can't be here for this, but I want to invest. Right. So I was first an investor in the company, not operational.
Okay.
Went out to LA and helped to build Clout. We didn't end up making it, but we raised another 3 million. Lots of challenges. That's a whole different podcast. A lot of lessons learned from that stint. Got fully vested. Like I said, it didn't turn into anything. No sort of big exits or anything like that. 2013, 14, Privy's being built back here in Colorado. Scott finds this amazing developer named Doug, and we would bring him in on an equity deal, and Privy's being built, launches, and starting to get a little bit of traction. And 2014, 15 rolls around, and Scott's like, okay, how's it going out in LA? Like, are you going to move back to Colorado? Would you consider, coming down as a larger owner in the company, carve off some shares for you as a partner? And I was like, let's do it. So moved back to Colorado, went full-time with Privy operationally. And that's when we really started investing the time and the money to grow the platform, get it out there. because one of our data sets, and this was before we acquired our national data set, we were only in certain markets. So when Privy first launched, it was only in Denver. And
Right.
then we went and got another market and then another market. And so it was slow growth because of how we chose to scale it, which was with MLS data, MLS data
Right.
being the most accurate. And so, it was market here, market there. And, to this day, we still have, there's over 600 MLSs, and we've got probably over 120 direct to MLS data feeds.
Right.
Only platform in the world that has that quality of data on scale like we do.
Right.
And but it's taken forever. So about 6 years ago, we did acquire a national data set of public record and what we call third party listing data, which isn't the quality or the timeliness of that direct to MLS data, but it still allows us to operate nationwide.
Right.
If you've seen a platform like PropStream or Batch Leads, that's the quality they have. They are national, county record, public record, third party listing data. So there's no photos. If a property sells, it might be a week before county records knows about it. There's no private remarks or stuff for agents to use. So it does allow you to grow, but the quality isn't there.
Right.
And so that's one of the things I think makes us really unique and different at Privy, is that we have spent the time to build those relationships directly with each MLS. And now with the MLSs that we have, the 120 plus, that gives us about 90% coverage of all the major populated areas. The rest of those MLSs are smaller rural MLSs that people probably shouldn't be investing in anyway, right?
Right.
Because it's a comparable driven business. And
Right.
there's not a whole lot of reason to go try to flip a property in, Nebraska out in the middle of the cornfields, right? Like, it's going to
Yeah.
be tough to sell and it's going to be tough to evaluate because the comps aren't there, right?
Right.
So that was a lot of the decision making we had to make early on was, which markets are we going to launch? It turned out it was, kind of a two-pronged approach where we
Right.
wanted major city centers. We went off of what people were asking for, and we also looked at the amount of investor activity that were in those areas.
As a consumer and user, I can say it's been awesome to watch Preview grow. Like you mentioned, initially I kind of used it as a comping tool, and it was only here in the Denver area, which luckily I was here in Denver to see it at its infancy. And now you have, the rental where I used to go to Rent a Meter to use, and you actually have investor friendly agents that you suggest to people. I mean, it's really come a long way since 2016. So I applaud you on building the platform and just constantly making it better. But I kind of want to circle back a little bit. You talked about being in loans, and then you were in National Guard. Like most people, when they start off investing, they start off like wholesaling and doing some fix and flips. So as far as an investor into real estate, how did you get started? Did you start it off agent? So
That was
how
as
did
an
you
agent.
start?
Yeah.
How did you get started in your career?
It was buying. So it was a mixture actually, because the way I realized that investing really was viable was when I was doing loans for fix and flippers.
Mm-hmm.
And I would see, I would make, 2 points on a deal, maybe 1 point on up front and then a point on the back when we sold the loan. And I was like, okay, that's pretty healthy. But then, these investors would come in, I'd see them making, $50,000 checks on something they spent 3 months on. And
Right.
that's when I started to really like, okay, this is pretty interesting. So I first partnered up with flippers that were doing deals,
Okay.
being financial partners. And then it's kind of learning the business, going to the projects, being on, out there and, making some low level decisions, helping with demo and stuff like that,
Right.
started to get a bigger piece of the pie. And then I did a couple of my own flips. Wholesaling I did by accident. Like I would get a deal thinking I was going to have the time to do it, and then realizing I didn't. And then I would just sell the deal to somebody else that I knew had the bandwidth and the resources to execute and finish the project.
Okay.
So wholesaling I've never been like a full-time wholesaler. I've always just done things here and there.
Right.
It's just been kind of a tool in the toolbox. I think everybody should wholesale.
Right.
And it's always interesting to me how people call themselves wholesalers when really they're just an investor, and wholesaler is just one of the exit strategies that they can do,
Right.
right? Because if you get a property, it can go in a lot of different buckets. You could wholesale it, you could fix and flip it, you could do, some creative financing situation. Lots of things you can do with the property. I think wholesaling is one of those things that people should do, and it's a shame that so many people have ruined it for others because they just didn't know what they were doing, and now wholesaling has this huge negative, perception of it. But anyway, I definitely think it's something that people should do. And then we were also acquiring properties and building a portfolio.
Okay.
And this is ultimately where things sort of went sideways for me was my business partner, because I started a mortgage company. It's
Okay.
called Mortgage Mall. We had an office down in Cherry Creek off of Second, and we were there for a couple of years, and we did well as a mortgage company. But one of the strategies that we were doing was we're buying these. Basically, it was like a BRRRR strategy. So we
Okay.
buy a house that needs some work, we go in, fix it up, refinance it, pull as much cash as we could out of it, and then we'd find another property and do it again. And so I built a decent sized portfolio, like 7 or 8 properties, nothing too extravagant. But if you remember at that time, Jose, 80/20s were really popular. Remember
Right.
the 80/20s?
Mm-hmm.
So they would do an 80% first mortgage and then 20% second, so that you didn't have to pay mortgage insurance. And then that second one would be like a HELOC or, some second mortgage that had a higher interest rate. And so we were really just pulling all the cash out, and we would take them, rent them out, but they would maybe clear a couple $100 a month, right? Because we were over leveraging them.
Right.
And then when the downturn happened and the shit hit the fan with the market,
Yeah.
I was left holding all these mortgages. So my business partner was kind of what I would call her like a mentor.
Sure.
And I really put a lot of faith into her because she was teaching me, and I almost treated her like family. We were like family at the time.
Right.
And she ended up screwing me majorly. So after the downturn happened and we started to lose some of these properties, I don't remember what year it was, but one year for Thanksgiving, she was going to go back to the East Coast, and she's like, "Hey, I'm going back. I'm going home." Little did I know she had no intention of ever coming back.
Oh, wow.
And she bailed and left this mortgage company
Crap
for me
on
to
crap
handle on my own.
sandwich.
All these properties that, some of them were rented, some of them weren't. And the ones that we weren't, clearing,
Mhm.
we were covering with the money we had in the bank. Well, she emptied the bank accounts too.
Oh, wow.
And so it started, right? I was like, okay, I
Sure.
just can't keep, well, at first I tried to keep these properties afloat with my own cash,
Right.
which was a bad move. I should have just, walked away, but I didn't want my FICOs to get hurt. And
Right.
there was a credibility thing, and there was, it felt like I was, failing, and I was, right. And so I did it the best I could for a while. I ended up losing all but one of those properties. One of them I kept because it was my primary. Um, and yeah, I took a big hit, and like a lot of people did at that point. And that's
Sure.
when I decided to reinvent myself. Moved out of the mortgage business, focused entirely just on real estate. And then that's when I said, okay, there's all these foreclosures, right? I was one of those people that was losing properties. And so I had intimate knowledge on the process
Right.
and turned myself into a foreclosure expert. And then that's when I went to the Mercury Alliance and started doing, using that as a lead source for more deals.
Gotcha. I was gonna say, so because we know each other, I know that you don't just invest in Colorado. You did at one point invest out of state. How did you learn how to do that if you didn't have a background in real estate?
Well, the time that I did invest out of state, I was pretty seasoned by that point. This was just like, I don't know, 3 years ago is when I started the process.
Okay.
But I had been teaching people how to do it by using Privy for years.
Right.
I just wasn't doing it. And
Gotcha.
so at that point, I was thinking, okay, the market in Colorado was really difficult to make money in, especially for rentals, right?
Yeah, sure.
And the prices were just going up, and it was really difficult to make anything cash flow that you were buying new that you didn't put a bunch of cash down on.
Right.
And so I knew that there was a lot of money being made in the Midwest because I was seeing it. I was using Privy every day, and I was still a little gun shy about what had happened in 2008 and 9 as well. But it's
Right.
still, for some reason, the stars aligned, and it just made sense.
Right.
And so I made a goal to start doing virtual wholesaling. And
Okay.
I basically just did what I was teaching people to do. So I would pull Privy up, and we have a filter inside of Privy that allows you to see in what's called investor activity. And actually, in 2001, we applied for a patent. We actually just got our patent in December
Of this year or last year?
of last year. Yep.
It took that long. Wow.
To 4 years.
Okay.
4 years to get the patent. So we were patent pending for 4 years. But the patent was on a thing we call comparative search. Comparative search basically takes closed deals that other investors have had and they've completed, and we use that data to basically reverse engineer what a deal looks like in a market, and then duplicate a filter that's looking for similar properties you can buy today.
Right.
Okay. And so back when I decided to start looking out of state, I was using this process. And so you first find the investor activity, you find where people are doing deals. And most of the time when people are doing a deal, they use what's called percentage of ARV, right? This is even with rentals. Sometimes people use that, but mostly rentals are cash flow. So in a fix and flip, BRRRR, or wholesale situation, ARV is king. But you literally can't determine after repair value on a property that you're evaluating if you aren't in an area where people are doing flips.
Right.
ARV is determined by houses that are flipped, right, after repair value. And so the goal is to, okay, instead of just picking an area randomly and looking for quote unquote motivated sellers and hoping that the comps exist after you've found the opportunity, you only look in areas where the comps exist for either distressed properties or distressed sellers. Knowing that if you find a home that makes sense, the likelihood of you having the comps that you need to prove after repair value and substantiate the value are already present. So you eliminate a lot of the issues that people are facing right now when they're not using this reverse REI strategy, is what I call it, because they're just being opportunistic. They're evaluating anything that some people send to them.
Right.
And so they end up running comps on properties out in the middle of nowhere where there's no, and they're gonna be like, well, I can't figure out what the ARV is. Right. And they spend a day and a half trying to figure it out. And they're trying to force a property to be a deal when it
Right.
really isn't, because they just need something, right? Because leads are so hard to come by. And it's a waste of time. So I thought, okay, only focus in on these areas that have high investor activity and pull lists from there. But what I also found that happened is we researched the on-market deals versus the off-market deals after the fact.
Okay.
And what we found is in high investor activities, in a lot of these markets that we were tracking, close to 70% of all the deals came from the MLS.
Interesting.
In low investor activity areas, it's harder to find deals. So more of those opportunities come direct from seller.
Right.
So I was like, okay, well, that's interesting. What markets are the ones that have high investor activity, have this lower price range, and have the opportunity for me to buy rental properties where they're actually going to cash flow.
Right.
And so I was looking at the data, and three markets floated to the surface: Chicago, St. Louis, and Indianapolis. Midwest, low to mid-range prices, lots of investor activity. Chicago by far had the most investor activity of any of those markets at the time. Actually, nationwide, Chicago was the highest. But Chicago is in Illinois, and Illinois is not landlord friendly.
No.
And so I was thinking back to some of Pace's advice when he's like, avoid blue states, right? Like, don't go to blue states because it's going to make it harder on yourself. And you don't want to put yourself in a situation down the road where, they're going to choose the renter before you, right? They're going to be, the government's going to lean their direction and make it harder on the landlord.
Right.
So even though Chicago had more investor activity, I decided against it. And then it was between Indianapolis and St. Louis. And a couple of different factors I looked at it. St. Louis had more investor activity. I liked the history of St. Louis. And so I chose that market. And then I just, again, executed what I was teaching people to do.
Yeah.
First thing is go and research the market. With our investor activity, we can see what people are buying properties for, what they're selling them for, the percentage of ARV they're buying at, right? So before a tool like Privy, a deal was basically universally calculated, and the formula they would use was the 70% MAO formula.
Right.
You're familiar with it. So 70% times the after repair value minus construction costs minus an assignment fee, that's your offer. Well, more often than not, if you do that blindly, it means that you don't really know the market. You haven't done the local market research to figure out where you really need to be price-wise.
Yeah.
Not only to find a deal, but also be competitive. Like you could submit lowball offers every day and never get a deal. Well, how is that worth your time? It's not. So there's a sweet spot where you want to submit an offer low enough to where there's still a margin, but but not so low that you're not winning the bid, right? So you want to be able to increase your offer enough to where it has a chance of being accepted, but there's still margins there to make the numbers work, right? There's a sweet spot there. You have to be in the middle. And so I researched that by looking at the deals. There's what's called a comparative market analysis that Privy builds for every house in the US. And we do that on these sold deals too. So I can pull up a list of every single flip that happened. I could zero in on the right neighborhood, because when you're thinking about, okay, I need comps, right? I'm doing the reverse REI strategy. It isn't just, I'm going to be in St. Louis general. It's like, I didn't need to be in the same neighborhood, because if my goal is to make sure that I have comps for this distressed property I find, those comps have to be within a half a mile of where I'm at. So I'm looking like very like micro, not macro, micro neighborhoods, intersections of where this investor activity is. And that's where I'm looking for leads. And so I was able to learn what a deal is faster than anybody ever could before, right? Because before, to be an expert in an area, you'd have to flip multiple properties, and you have to really farm an area, and then you start to learn it. With data, you can become an expert in a market in a day. And I was ingesting all that information about these markets. I was calling agents that were flipping these properties and just starting to build some relationships.
Sure.
One of my goals was to find an agent who would work with me remotely and be basically my eyes and ears on the ground, because I had never been to St. Louis. And when I was talking to these agents, they're like, well, you're in Denver. How are you going to do this? I'm like, well, I'm going to do wholesaling. Now, my long-term goal is to build a portfolio of rental properties, but I need to learn the market first. So I'm going to start off with wholesaling. And I really need an agent who can be my eyes and ears on the ground, has the bandwidth to go and look for, properties for me, doesn't mind writing offers. I'm not going to lowball, or I'm going to make sure we're writing offers that have a chance of being accepted, and you get the commission, right? And some agents were like, I'm not quite sure. Some other agents were like, holy moly, like, this could turn into something big.
Right.
So I found an agent that really resonated with the business model, and she was just inspired and excited, and she ended up being a great partner because we closed a bunch of deals together. But that was the next thing. So I had to get my boots on the ground. So I knew the market, I knew my boots on the ground. And I also told the agent, listen, I've got the ability to find properties that make sense on my own. Like, all you need to do is write the offers and walk a couple homes. And again, that's because that's what Privy does, right? So
Sure.
chose my market. And then at that point, there's another feature inside of Privy, which was called find similar active deals. So I've isolated an area to an area in South Side St. Louis called Dutchtown. And this was the hottest neighborhood in all of St. Louis. And I created a filter there. And based off of my research, if I could find a house that was at 52% of the after repair value or lower, the numbers would make sense. And I also would offer up to 150,000. And I was looking at 3-bedroom, 2-bath plus homes. And I was starting to find some deals. But, oh, and I forgot to mention, while I was doing my market research, I was also building my buyers list. So every one of those properties that were flipped had a flipper attached to it.
Right.
And so I would, you can actually export this data. So I exported it, took it, skip traced it, and I started calling these people that were doing the deals and just explaining what I was doing. You know, I'm marketing, I'm coming across leads. One of the things that I was taking note of when I was researching these properties, because we have the before and after side by side on every flip. So we can see if they bought it on or off market. We can also see what percentage of ARV they bought it at. So I knew that a flipper, whatever the name is, would buy from the MLS, bought in a certain area. I knew exactly what kind of properties they were buying because I could see the last house they purchased, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 1,100 square foot, 2-story home in this neighborhood, and what percentage of ARV. And I said, if I could find a property that's just like the one you just bought, would you be interested in it? And they'd be like, heck yeah. And so I had buyers lining up because I was showing them that I knew the market and I knew exactly what they were looking for, and they wanted to work with me. So buyers list was building as this process is going. Then I set the filter in Privy. I said, show me every house that I can buy today that's less than $150,000. It's at least a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 1,100 square foot or more in this area of Dutchtown. It's at 52% of the after repair value or lower. Save the search, set it, and then at that point, Privy did all the heavy lifting for me. So I was running every hour looking for properties that match that specific deal criteria based off of what I knew my buyers would buy. And I already knew they would buy on-market properties too, because they had agreed that they would. And I had evidence historically that they had purchased stuff from the MLS.
Right.
The model was starting to come together. I just had to execute it. So at that point, Privy starting to find deals. It would emails me. I look at this comparative market analysis. It shows me the property, shows me all the comps that prove it's a deal. And then I was just verifying, right? Because sometimes, like, I learned this from Nika, there are certain areas of town, like, you just wouldn't cross certain streets.
Right.
And I didn't have that local market knowledge, being 100% virtual. But that's the benefit of having somebody like Nika, who's boots on the ground, is she can tell you those local market subtleties. Like, you know, you can buy a property on this side of this track, these railroad tracks, but all the comps have to be on that side too. Like, you can't cross over. And so I started to learn some of these things. And so some of the properties that Privy was flagging for me really weren't deals because it was pulling comps on the other side of the highway, even though they were, 0.2 miles away. It's still really a comp, but if you really get down to the nitty gritty, it wasn't. So I had to eliminate some of those false positives, but I was getting a significant amount. Like, I was writing 10 offers a week minimum. Sometimes it was multiple per day. And then Nika would go out. She would take photos, video, make sure the property is what I thought it was. And when I would send her the deal, I would just share the CMA with her. She can open up on her computer, and I would tell her what I thought the after repair value was, what the offer is that I wanted to submit. And we already had a templatized um, real estate agreement, right? Like it already had all my information in there. We knew how much time I needed for marketing. All of the dates and deadlines were just templatized. Everything was templatized, but the address, basically. And of course, we also had an assignment clause in it, so
Okay.
it'd be able to assign it. So we put and/or assigns, and we had a clause in the additional provisions that said we could assign it as well. Started writing offers, getting things locked up, and then we had to start dispoing. Right. So she actually had a network of investors. So I would leverage her network as a dispo arm. And then I would tap into my buyers list that I had built. And there were people there that were liking the deals too. So I was locking properties up on market. Never saw them, never set foot in St. Louis up to that point.
Right.
And then was wholesaling deals. And I was like, this is amazing. Like it was like Christmas. Like it was like taking candy from a child.
Right.
It couldn't be any easier. And I had perfected the process so much so that some of the properties that I was getting were like, man, these would be great rentals. And so after a handful of wholesale deals, I decided I was going to keep one of them because it was in decent shape, needed
Right.
some updating. And that was the trigger for me when I realized I'm just going to move. And so I told everybody I'm moving to St. Louis. They're like, what are you talking about? You've never even been there. I'm
Right.
like, well, I own a property out there. I've been wholesaling deals. I built a small network of people out there I can work with. I'm moving. So I packed my car up, drove to St. Louis, and I was there for over 9 months. Did like a live-in fix. It was like a live-in burr, basically.
Yeah.
Bought a few other properties, got those rented out. Was wholesaling still, doing deals. I was working obviously with Privy remotely, right? Because I can
Right.
basically just sit at a computer as long as I've got an internet connection. And man, it was an amazing experience. I had a blast doing it.
That's awesome. So the name of my channel is Good, Bad, and Ugly. You have shared a little bit, but can you pick just like one story that's like warms your heart, and then another one that you learned a big lesson from that maybe the audience can learn from as well?
Warms my heart. Like
Doesn't
a
have to
feel
warm your
good
heart.
story. Like
Like something like I did it, or like felt like a sense of accomplishment. I guess like a good. If you don't have one, that's fine.
I do. I think it's what I just said, honestly. Like, I'm getting up there in age and
Aren't we all?
I get bored, right?
Yeah.
Like the mundane bores me.
Okay.
And I think it was that time where I was starting to get a little comfortable with where I was with the company and in my life. And there wasn't a lot of whole new challenges for me. And yeah, I'll go take a class, I'll do something, learn a new skill. And I was like, man, I need something big. And
Sure.
that's what St. Louis was for me. It was like, okay, I need a big change. I need to make a big splash. And just picking up and moving surprised me and a lot of people. And it was a massive success. I enjoyed a lot of it. A little lonely at times because I didn't have my support structure out there, except for a handful of people that I became friends with. I actually spent Thanksgiving at my painter's house. Um, he ended up being one of my drinking buddies.
There you go.
But that was probably a time where I was like really proud that I was willing to jump in with both feet, be completely uncomfortable, not knowing what was going to happen, and just going for it.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And then the crappy story I also mentioned too, which was when I got taken by my mentor and ex business partner, and she drained our bank accounts and left me with all the mortgages and the rent on our building for the mortgage company, and basically just bailed. And I think the big lesson there is, and I don't know if I would have found anything, but I just didn't do enough due diligence on her as a person,
Right.
like background check, references, like really digging in. But I put it, like I said, she was like family to me, and she was teaching me. And I felt like I didn't have a place to question her credibility.
Sure.
Right.
Absolutely.
And if that's one piece of advice I would give to anybody listening, is that it doesn't matter where you know somebody from. Maybe you know them from a local RIA. Maybe you're in the same group together. Maybe you're in Sub 2 or Gator, or you're in Owners Club together. Like, do your due diligence. Like that's a great first way to get introduced to somebody, but dig deeper. If it ends up being nothing, you're going to be fine. But you might catch something in someone's past that would be a red flag that would prevent you from getting into a bad situation.
Yeah, that's great advice. So through this whole process, you shared that you lend on some things, you are an investor, and now you have this awesome tool that I still use to this day to help me with my business. What is something that you're looking for if somebody wanted to bring a resource to you, or maybe wanted to partner with you? What are your needs? What is something that somebody can bring to you?
Well, the next big move in my business and in my professional career is fundraising, managing a fund for multifamily real estate. So I built and launched a fund recently. I haven't done a deal yet, but I have been a limited partner on multiple deals, so I understand the process.
Right.
And I'm really educating and aligning myself with fund managers and those kinds of people that are out there doing large multifamily deals.
Sure.
So if someone wants to work with me, I would say if you are interested in investing in multifamily passively as a limited partner, we definitely should talk. If you've got multifamily deals where the numbers look interesting and you think that it could make sense for for an investor, then I would certainly want to look at it. And then fundraisers, right? So I've got an offer in a property right now in North Dakota. It's about a $5 million deal, 5 to 6. It's in that range because we asked for a bit of a discount.
Okay.
And if we lock that property up, then we're going to need help raising money too. So if you're interested in any of those sorts of scenarios, then certainly reach out. You can find me on Instagram at Benson_REI. That's where you can check it out. I also have a podcast where I interview people that are doing these deals. I just interviewed a fund manager yesterday who's doing some exciting things. So check out the podcast. It's called the REI Hacker Podcast. We're on all the podcasting platforms, and then we put out a lot of content, shorts and things like that on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube. So check those out as well.
And just for the audience, as always, I'll have all of his contact information in the description. And if you like this episode, it'll also be cross-platformed over to Spotify. I'm trying to make it easy for everybody to enjoy the content that I'm trying to provide. Benson, it's been great having you on. You're a great guest, great friend, great partner in Owners Club, right? And looking forward to working with you more and more in the years to come. And for you, the audience, the fam, we'll see you on the next episode.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jose.